Broadcasting live from the offices of policebackground.net. This is the Police Applicant Podcast with your host, Ken Roybal.
All units stand by for last call for X-ray 26, Detective Rachael Flick. X-ray 26. X-ray 26. X-ray 26, Detective Rachael Flick. Negative response from X-ray 26, Detective Rachael Flick. Greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. Thank you for your bravery and years of service. You will not be forgotten. End of watch.
Episode. And before we get started, I want to welcome Rachael Flick to the podcast. Rachel, thank you so much for being here.
Hey Ken, hey Minerva, thank you so much for having me. I'm so looking forward to sharing this story and joining you guys in your mission.
I appreciate that so much. The reason that this came about is every police department experiences the loss of an officer. And not many times do we hear the stories of the survivors, the families, the spouses, things like that. Mm-hmm. And Rachael lost her husband, Micah, in a police shooting. We'll get into that on February 5th, 2018. And that kind of sent your world into a tailspin. And the incredible thing about you, Rachael, is you are not shy about sharing everything that goes into the loss of a police officer. And I've gone to your website, listened to your podcast, and you do an incredible job of expressing the grief, the things that you have to go through, and everything that the loss of a loved one entails a lot. But the loss of a police officer, that's a different journey, I want to say. And so we want to talk about that. So as we start, we'll get a little bit more into this story, but tell us about you. And I've seen your bio on your website. Tell us who you are. Well,
I'm a Kansas girl. I've been in Colorado now for about 17 years, but I was raised in the heartland. I came out here to go to a leadership training institute, and then I was like, Colorado Springs is so beautiful. I have to live here. And I moved, and I actually met my husband, Micah, working at the YMCA the following year, and we got married in the year that we met. And I got my first degree in exercise physiology, and I have a lot of passion for the body and wellness and integrating healing through the body. And then I got my master's in counseling in 2014. In the midst of that, Micah also was getting his master's degree, and we had 2-year-old twins. So we just knew how to be overachievers, I guess, in all of that. But now in becoming widowed, I found a lot of purpose in serving others and in sharing these stories and just figuring out like the bones of hope, like what is hope actually made out of, and how can I help other people be resilient, have post-traumatic growth. And so that's kind of a little nutshell of who I am. So solo mom, the twins are 12 now. And I actually have custody of my father with early onset Alzheimer's. So I'm kind of already in that sandwich generation space.
Yeah. You've got a lot of resiliency built into your DNA. It appears you're a very, very strong person. So that's pretty encouraging that you're out there mentoring people. And I noticed that there was an article that you are still. There's an article, I can't remember how current it was, but that you're still out there reaching out to other police widows. And that.
Yeah, I think my passion really continues, especially for line of duty loss, because when I lost Micah, I had no idea that there was an entire machine around line of duty loss. And I was swept up into it and all of the um, formality and the ceremony and really beautiful traditions and things like that. But it's also incredibly overwhelming. I mean, I came home from the hospital after going to the coroner's office and there was hundreds of people in my house, like just stunning responses to that. And so there's something about the line of duty loss and that widow where we understand one another at an even deeper level. Like, I have a heart for all widows, for people in the community of the grieving, no matter who they've lost. But to understand what it is to be in motorcades and, see 300-foot flags and watch people line the streets for your spouse's sacrifice, that's just another level. So being able to say, I see you and I understand what you're going through in a way that very few people do is something that's important to me.
Yeah. And, I come from a very large agency. Initially, Minerva came from a very large agency, and then she went to a smaller agency. And one day, I don't know what prompted me, but a couple of years ago, I decided to find out the line of duty deaths in the time that I started the department to the time I retired. And there were 42 officers lost their lives in the line of duty.
In your department?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So I worked for LAPD, and it was, at the time we were in the 9,000 range for officers. But the thing is that I went to funerals for about 10 years, police funerals for about 10 years. And after 10 years, I just couldn't anymore. Yeah. I had my fill. And so one of the important things about this podcast is Minerva and I are not shy about talking to police. This is obviously a police candidate podcast, but we're not shy about letting police candidates know what they're getting into. And one of those things is the worst thing that can happen is you may lose your life in the line of duty. And we want our police candidates to know you need to confront this before you sign on the dotted line to go to the academy. It's important that you know that this is a dangerous job. So I'm curious. I know that there's this amazing love story because I read your website. There's this amazing love story between you and Micah. Tell us how you met and all the way through when the kids are born and your life together.
Well, so we were actually both working at the YMCA, but I didn't know that because he had already been accepted to the sheriff's office. And so he was phasing out at the Y, getting ready for the academy, but he was still regularly working out there. And so one of the things that the YMCA values is being a third place for people, right? Where they can have community and connection. And if you see people who are regularly, attending, working out, being present, go get to know them, right? Like as a staff member, go get to know that person. And so I was like, man, this guy is here every Tuesday at 1 p.m. He's so consistent. I've seen him over and over again. I'm just going to go introduce myself. And we started talking and, what turned into a conversation of attraction and similar values. And we ended up, I laugh because we, as both being personal trainers and into fitness, we worked out probably harder than I have before or since that time, just so we could keep spending time together. Like we would do abs for 45 minutes. I'm like, my abs can't take another second. Like there's no more repetitions in me, but like, we're not really dating yet. And so if I say I'm done doing abs, then like we're done hanging out. Right. So there was a lot of
finding ways to hang out.
Self-sacrifice in those exercises just to get to know each other a little better. And through those conversations and those experiences, he asked me out for dinner, and we actually went out for dinner on Saturday, and he started the academy on Monday. So I got to walk through his beginning to end experience. And, I really had no idea. When Micah knew what he wanted, he went and got it. Okay. So he proposed to me after 4 months, and we met and married in 9 months. Our first date was February 3rd. We got married November 3rd.
Wow.
And so I was just kind of caught up in the excitement and wedding planning and, falling in love with someone and watching what he was doing, right? And he'd tell me about the different tests he had to take and, arrest control and having to meet certain standards at the range and, his driving classes. And I just kind of was like watching from the sideline, like, that's super cool. But didn't have any idea what I was signing up for to be a law enforcement wife. That was just, it was like a job, right? He's got a job. The guy's employed. That's great. Um, and so he started out in the jail. And that was interesting to watch that kind of take a toll on his heart. And I think corrections is maybe one of the harder places because you're just so surrounded by all the hard, right? There's no sunshine really to speak of. You're constantly surrounded by people who are under a tremendous amount of stress. And the staffing ratios were ridiculous. He would be 1 on 42 in the high security and 1 on like 80 in the low security, and so he was constantly feeling that threat of like, 1 on 82, like I'm screwed, if something goes down. And so watching that stress really affect him and feel like the tension of not being sure if the agency was really doing what was in his best interest. And that was kind of one of the first times where I was like feeling like I was really considering what he was doing and what it could cost him, um, through that time, he started his bachelor's degree and finished that. And then he did that in psychology. And then I got pregnant with the twins in 2010, total surprise. It was pretty hilarious. I had tears in my eyes because I was like, I don't know if I signed up for this. And he's like, 2 tax deductions, like such a practical guy, like hilarious. And so those little people came into our life and absolutely transformed everything. I believe he was at the courthouse at the time, which was nice because, they do banking hours, right? And so with weekends and evenings, and that was nice for parenting. And also because he started to get his master's in leadership. And I went back for my master's in counseling in that time. I will say I have a tremendous respect for families that do law enforcement because it isn't just the officer that serves, it's the family. And I had no idea. I had no idea about that. We talk about that in the military, but I've heard military wives or spouses tell me differently, like, well, it's different because when they're home, they're not, day to day risking their lives, and when they are, they're kind of away. So you have this separation from the intensity that they're engaging, and as opposed to like, go risk your life, come home, have dinner, talk to the kids, do homework, connect with your spouse, go risk your life, come back, this day-to-day experience. And so Micah at that time went to patrol and he was working midnights. So midnights, both of us in school, 2-year-old twins. And I will tell you, like, we were all the way to the wall with stress, like just trying to connect, like very much in that space of the ships passing in the night, like trying to keep little kids quiet while their daddy's sleeping upstairs and during the day. That's just next to impossible. And he had created these blackout curtains for our bedroom. And so I felt like we lived in a cave. Like it just created a lot of lifestyle, for us. In the midst of that, I really admire how much he worked to honor our relationship. One of my favorite dates that he ever made happen for us was we put the kids to bed and he made a putt-putt course in our house, and he got 5-gallon bucket, from Home Depot, and some piping and just anything he can get out of the garage. And he made like little holes that we had to do this course in our house. And like, babysitting is an issue, cost is an issue, finances, time, all of that. And yet he was still so intentional to pursue me in that space where we were under so much stress and trying to accomplish so many goals. And, I remember falling in love with Micah on our date on Valentine's Day. And so every year we really made Valentine's Day a big deal. And he continued to show up for that, romance me in those ways, pursue my heart, and choose me in the midst of the reality of balancing the pain that is so evident, right? Being with the worst people on the worst day every day. And that's what it is to be in law enforcement. And so he was really struggling with like the nature of man and the goodness of God, and just like, what the heck is going on? You know, just that the way that law enforcement made him wrestle with those big life questions in the midst of, you know, having to go and, you know, clean up suicide scenes and tell parents that their child was gone, and you know, some of the most heartbreaking things that you could ever have to do. So I really loved it. The last weekend that I got to spend with him, he took the kids to a gymnastics meet, and then helped me. This is true love. Okay, guys, like he helped me clean the house for the Super Bowl party that we hosted, and just walked side by side with me in that, you know, vacuuming, cleaning the kitchen and moving the furniture so that we could fit everybody in. And that was my last full day with him. But that was really one of the most beautiful pictures of his heart, was just serving his family.
And he, there's so many tributes every year on the anniversary of his death. There's so many tributes, and one of the things that I get about him, and I was going to ask you, what did you like and love about him as a husband and a father? And but his coworkers really had a profound respect for Micah, and and to me, he just seemed like he was a really, really just an amazing, incredible, kind, passionate person.
Mm-hmm. You know, the only thing that I regret about all that is I didn't learn that side of him until after he passed, and that his coworkers started telling me that. And that would be my challenge to anyone on any day, is don't let your love be left unsaid. You don't know how long you have, and people don't necessarily know how you feel about them. And so if you have something good to say to someone, say it now. You know, I think Micah maybe didn't even know how respected he was in his agency. And so to see people coming out of the woodwork with these stories of his integrity, of his kindness, just of his willingness to even say, I'm going to choose a higher level of ethics and not, you know, have the potty mouth that is so common for cops, right? Like it just, that distinguished him as being the cream of the crop. You know, when he went into investigations, what his partner was telling me, you know, like, okay, so you're getting a scene, and like if 9 pictures covers one wall for documentation, Micah took 27, you know, like I felt like I was watching a movie. If I just scrolled, it became like a moving scene, and all the photos that he would take, or the ways that he would go to above and beyond to do his job with excellence. He purchased like $150 massive book on forensics because he was investigating a potential child abuse case, and the details were foggy, and he didn't feel confident. The doctor in the case felt really confident that abuse was present, and he said, I don't see the evidence of that. And so he went out and spent $150 of our money to go get this forensic textbook, and to research, what does it look like? What does this type of trauma in the body look like? I mean, just he could have totally, you know, written that off. He could have charged somebody and, you know, let the DA pick it up. Right. But he wanted to do the right thing. I mean, even to the point where it just absolutely drove me nuts. Like, you just rolled through that stop sign. I'm like, dude, you just worked, you know, 3rd shift, and you made me drive. Like, he would race me to the car so that he didn't have to get in the driver's seat. And so he would make me drive and then critique my driving the whole time. I was like, you can't play both sides, buddy. But yes, his agency saw him as a tremendous asset. He was very intentional with his report writing, with the way that he cared for people. What really blew me away was people that he had arrested coming to me and telling me what a good cop he was, and how he had treated them with tremendous dignity, and that they like met the best cop that they'd ever seen. And that I felt like was probably the most telling tribute to his integrity.
Yeah, Minerva, when in the time in police work, excuse me, it's rare that you come across cops where someone goes, that he's just a really good guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, in law enforcement, you learn to internalize a lot of feelings when you're a police officer, you work in law enforcement. So it's not very common. Like, it's not surprising to me what Rachel is saying, that she didn't know, and possibly Micah himself didn't know how his coworkers felt about him, because it's just not something that it's openly said. I mean, I hope people are now with, where mental health, people are talking more about mental health and speaking up about how you feel. I hope people are also sharing with their coworkers or, their brothers and sisters out there in law enforcement, how they feel about them. Because it does make, although, we have to be these, have these shells around us when you're dealing with, not the best of society sometimes. Um, some people still need those words of affirmation from their partners,
Yeah.
And so if you're out there and you're hearing this and you're on the job, it's okay to say to your partner, hey man, I love you and you do such a great job, and whatever.
Or I really like the way that you handled that arrest. I think that you did a great job de-escalating that. Or thank you so much for following up on that paperwork for me. Or I thought you did a great job on that citizen contact. That was really professional, right? Like there was true love for Micah from his coworkers, and they shared that really in depth. But I think small compliments and encouragements can go so far.
And that goes also outside of, just law enforcement. Overall, people don't really say how they feel about another person until it's their memorial service,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's sad. Like you said, tomorrow's not promised.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need to let someone know how you feel, hopefully in a positive way, let them know,
Yeah.
because you may not get that chance.
Don't borrow on tomorrow.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's a good, even today, the things that Micah did, he's still going to teach young recruits into 2023. So what I'm learning today about him is that for our listeners who go into police work, you don't have to go in there all guns a blazing and hardcore. I'm going to kick butt today. You can go in there and treat people with respect and be kind.
Absolutely.
So I think that's an important lesson that we can learn today from what we're talking about. Micah worked for the El Paso County Sheriff's Office in Colorado.
Yes.
My very first
as
thought
opposed
was,
to Texas, right?
Yeah, I was thinking Texas, but so he was a sheriff's deputy. But his last assignment was he was a detective. Was he working a special assignment or case or anything like that?
Yeah. So he did. I think he did major crimes, and then he did financial crimes, and it was driving him nuts that there are actual Nigerian princes, and he could never get the FBI involved for high enough money amount. He's like, this is a waste of my time. It was frustrating for him. So then he switched to property crimes, and that was a great fit for him. And that's where he was when he was doing beat auto theft through law enforcement. And he did that every Monday, and they would go undercover and recognizing that car theft is a gateway crime. It's not just for joyriding for teenagers like it was in the 60s or the 70s. It's usually an indicator of the feeders for gangs and for drugs and for a lot of other things. Steal a car, go do another crime, which, supports higher level of organized crime. And so they were like, if we can get in on the bottom level there and go after the auto theft, I think we can impact crime on the higher level, which is what we're really aiming for. And so they were really successful. And I heard some very interesting stories of, they would basically kind of sneak up on people in plain clothes and arrest them. And he said one time he arrested somebody in the frozen foods aisle at the grocery store, and like the guy threw the pizzas, like his arms were full of frozen pizzas, and threw them up in the air, or like at Burlington. And, somebody's trying on shoes, and just like kind of the funny stories of those things going down, right? And I'm just the wife picking it up at the dinner table and being like, I'm pretty sure that like veterinarian stories at the end of the day are like not this interesting. Like like the stuff that he comes home and tells me that he did is definitely, eating the popcorn, listening to the story, and so he had a team that they worked with regularly. It was multi-agency through the state. And so in the 10 people that were there that day, there was, Pueblo and Denver and Colorado State Patrol, and all of those agencies were all involved. And it was a really highly coordinated effort. And that's something that they'd been doing for quite a while. And actually, we're having a major impact on auto theft, and we're having the highest rates of arrest of anywhere in the state. And I think even in our like region, being in the West.
It sounds like he was in a task force.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Every once in a while, our division would have a robbery GTA task force, and those were the best times because the robbers work hand in hand in stolen cars, and so we would pick up robbers, and yeah, it can be very impactful when you're snooping and pooping for those particular criminals. That's a fun time. That's a pretty good time. So it sounds like he was on a task force, and he was a detective, but he worked major crimes and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah, he switched for a couple different specialties within the unit before he landed where he felt like was the best fit for his skills and abilities.
I want to point something out. You're very lucky that he shared some of these stories with you because, as a woman who, worked in a primarily dominant, field, which is law enforcement, I would always hear the guys that I work with talk about how their wives would be like, "So how was your day?" And of course, they didn't really want to share what they saw because, you see such negative things. And maybe because they were in patrol, I don't know if they were doing the same when they were in a detective unit. But it sounds like he would share a lot of his life and work with you because obviously you're aware of all these stories. And that also shows how strong the relationship and the bond between you two was.
Yeah, I didn't even question that he would tell me about that. As a professional counselor, I did have some tools of if something was kind of graphic, and I would create, container like EMDR work container for myself, right? So I didn't get vicarious trauma from hearing the details of the things that he had gone through that day. But I mean, we were best friends, and I don't know that he was processing that with anyone else. And so, I remember, he told me about a lot of his calls, and one of my favorite dates with him was for his birthday. I think for his 33rd birthday when he was on patrol, he took me on a ride along with him. And so I got to go to the shift meeting and jump in the car and do the whole shift. And he was on the, 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift. And I was just absolutely captivated by seeing what he did for myself, right? Like, and I was like, "Babe, why didn't you take me before? Like, that was so cool." And I was just like psyched. I just was like, and I really had so much admiration and respect for him. And I saw the authority that he carried and how he carried it well. Like when he walked into someone's home who was not expecting him, at 1 a.m. or something, and how he handled those delicate situations. And,
Right.
and then just watching him and how intentional he was his nickname was Captain Officer Safety. And so, just all the things that he did where he was always watching his back and making sure that he was as aware as possible. And just the level of energy and investment being that vigilant takes, right? Like, and being in the county. So we have the biggest county in Colorado, El Paso County. And I can't tell you how many square miles it is, but it's absolutely ridiculously huge. And so his nearest backup was like 20 minutes. And I know that other agencies
Wow.
would have come in,
Wow.
a critical incident, but there was nobody around to back him up. If stuff went down, it was him. And to
Mm.
see him and the courage that took, and to do the job and do it well, I just had so much respect for him. And I was like, I really wish that I could have seen this part of your life up front, sooner. It would have given me an even greater level of compassion and empathy for you. So I
Mhm.
just encourage, parents and siblings and spouses and friends, go on ride-alongs, because you are going to be able to get into your loved one's world in a very meaningful way, and have a vision of what they do. And so, but yes, like we did share those things, and I'm not sure what's right for every relationship. I don't think that that's like you should tell them everything or some things, or you should not tell them anything
Right.
or some things. But yeah, I mean, we walked that out on a regular basis. And I knew the day that he went and there was a riot at the carnival, and how he almost had 300 people, like they had 10 officers and 300 people who wanted to riot. And just, I have visions of all these, I have pictures of all these experiences and all these calls that he went on.
Mhm. And maybe because you do have a background in counseling, so he knew that you would have, like you mentioned, you are able to compartmentalize some of the things that he told you that you didn't want it to affect you.
And I don't know
So,
if I was doing that consciously, for the record. Like, I look back
right.
and I'm like, oh, I was putting that somewhere so I could be present. Cause I remember sometimes, I mean, stories of children dying are really hard to
Right.
hear, right?
But that is exactly what officers do out in the
Every
field. And
day.
so when they get home and their spouse is like, "So how was your day?" They don't want to share that, right? And I mean, rightfully so. You're protecting your loved ones
Mhm.
from that part of society that most people don't see unless you're on the job.
I think you're also isolating yourself, and you're isolating yourself in your marriage, right? And I think that's why there's such a high failure rate, is because officers feel like they have to die on their sword, that
Yeah. And I
they
think
have to
things are
carry that.
changing now with
Mhm.
law enforcement being more open about talking about mental health and other, getting therapy. Now you hear more of, I mean, we hear it more in our podcast of officers, going to therapy because it takes a toll on you.
Mm.
It just accumulates, it compounds. All these events that you take part of, it compounds, and you need to figure out a way to help you with that. So I feel he was fortunate to be able to trust you enough to be able to share that with you.
I do too. I'm honored that he did.
Yeah.
And he did. I will say, we reached a place in our marriage where I saw his anxiety really mounting, and he was becoming even more hypervigilant than usual, right? Like,
Mm,
I expect that when I'm with someone in law enforcement or military, that they want to sit with their back to the wall with their eyes on the door. I just expect that, right?
right.
So there's that level, but then it was becoming, it was ruining his quality of life outside of work. And I just really began to challenge and encourage him, like, this isn't healthy and you don't have to live with this. And in his last year of life, he did go see the staff psychologist and built a really great relationship with them. And I think that that was hugely helpful and healing for him.
Good.
Yeah, I'm pretty old school, and I was on during a time when we never talked about anything, and it didn't really, I didn't really realize how much I didn't talk about anything about the things that I saw until several times, and this was years later that I'd be talking to someone. I'd either be like an old partner, and we were reliving times, experiences, or I talk to someone. I'm not big on war stories, but every once in a while something will come out, and my wife will be listening. I'll be on the phone or something like that. And I'll go, ha ha ha, we did, we did this. Ah, what a great time. Yeah, we almost bought the farm on that one. Remember? Blah, blah, blah. And then my wife goes, you never told me about that. And
Mm.
I'm like, oh, I mean, I didn't think about it. And so now
Yeah.
I'm so thankful that today's police agencies actually are invested in mental health and stuff, because that can mess you up,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
So, there's a couple of things. I want to segue into something. I'm gonna take a quick break, And then we're going to come back. We're going to talk about February 5th, 2018. We're going to be right back.
PoliceBackground.net is the premier background investigation prep site. With veteran investigator Ken Roybal, who spent 16 years conducting over 1,400 LAPD backgrounds. For more information, go to PoliceBackground.net.
Hey, we're back. There's a couple of things that just come to mind as we talk about this. Excuse me. A couple of things from Police Wives. I used to work almost all nights. I just thought that was the funnest time. Is that still the word, funnest?
Yes,
I thought that was the funnest.
That's the word.
And so, because all the kind of stuff would happen. So one night, a local police department, my wife peeked out the window. She heard a car parked on the curb at night. It's a black and white. She can't tell where it's at. She says her heart stopped. Because to have a black and white come to a police family's house usually only means one thing. It turns out they got out of the car, they went to this other house, but her heart stopped. The other thing is we hear from police spouses all the time. And I follow a lot of police spouse organizations, things like that on Instagram. And the common theme is that when you kiss your spouse, when they leave the house to go to work, every single day, you don't know if they're coming home. And that was that came to be a reality for you.
Yeah.
And so on from your website, I want to read something that just struck me. It says, on February 5th, 2018, Rachael Flick's entire life changed. Her husband of 10 years was killed in the line of duty. Listen to Rachael tell her story of life, of death, and resilience, and the resilience that followed. What I love about what you're doing is you're not shy. You're not shy. There's certain words that you don't shy away from. And I think that your story is so important to tell. So walk us through from the morning.
Okay.
Walk us through that day, because I think that's going to be the crux of this interview for me, is that day and what you experienced.
Yeah. Well, Micah and I did have an agreement that we always kiss each other goodbye, whether we had slept well, whether we had had a fight, whether, somebody had onion breath, like no matter what, right? Like we made it a point to connect in that moment, to kiss each other. I love you, right? And just honored the reality of the risk that he was taking every single day. And so Micah was a morning person and I was a night person. So sometimes that even meant him kissing me while I was still asleep before he left for work in the morning. And that morning was one of those days. And he came and he kissed me. Oh, it's going to make me cry. And I got up on one elbow and I smiled, and he was already like turning around and walking up the stairs. And that was the last time I ever saw him. And it was with such love and affection in my heart in that moment that he had, honored our deal, kissing me goodbye, even in my sleep. So we had a super busy weekend, a baby shower, a volunteer training. We'd hosted a football party for the Super Bowl the night before. I mean, just super busy, very tired. And so my plan that day was just to kind of rest and catch up for this ministry that I was launching the next day. And I knew that was going to be really big to start for the semester. And I did normal mom-wife things. I did laundry. And one of the things that I did that I think was a divine intervention was I watched This Is Us. And it was the episode where Jack dies in the fire. And she has to tell the triplets that their dad is gone. And I mean, I just was gutted by that episode with the rest of everybody who loved that show. went on with my normal day. We had carpool, and Eliana had ballet coming up. And so I'm going through the mom hustle, and we're changing clothes. And I have a friend who has recently experienced a miscarriage. And so I've got the phone cradled on my ear while I'm shimmying my daughter into her tights so that we can go to ballet. And I start to miss phone calls. And my friend is crying. She's just pouring out her heart. She's devastated about the loss of her pregnancy. But at like call 5, 6, 7, I was like, friend, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I really need to see what's going on. And I answer the phone, and it's my mother-in-law. And she said, Rachel, you have to come to the hospital. Micah's been shot. And I said, where? And she names the hospital. And I was like, no, I was like, on his body. And she said, I think in the chest. And I was like, in my mind, that was a safe place where I kind of found a little refuge, because I knew that Mr. Officer Safety was wearing his vest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, keep it together, keep it together, keep it together. I was like, Levi and Eliana, I want you to go get your tablet. I want you to go get a sweater, and I want you to fill a bag of snacks. We're going to the hospital. I was like, Daddy's been shot and we need to go. And at that moment, where I had allowed myself to go was that, we were going to go, Micah would be in surgery, and we would sit vigil in the hospital for a long night, and, he would be okay. This was critical, but he would be okay. That was what I had in that moment. And then I decline another call, which was dumb in that moment, but then they called me immediately right back, and I pick it up, and it's the undersheriff. And he is at our last known address, which is not where I was. And he had brought the knock at the door to someone else's house. And so he said, don't drive yourself, which I was like, oh, that's bad. Because, I'm used to being calm in crisis. So I was, of course, going to drive myself. I was like, he says that he thinks I shouldn't drive myself. That's a really bad sign. And so I waited, and in that space, my brother and sister-in-law come and pack my kids into the back of their car. And in the space of that time, Under Sheriff Breister comes, and I just see him, slide around the street corner and into the driveway, and he kind of tumbles out of his cruiser, and I could see pain just etched into his face. And he said, Rachel, I'm so sorry. We did everything we could. He didn't make it.
Mm.
And everything stopped. The world stopped turning in that moment for me. And I was really grateful that my kids were in the back of my brother and sister-in-law's car, so that I could just have this moment to experience the worst day of my life. And I climbed in the car with Joe and screamed and clawed at my legs and said, no, God, no, 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 no. For the 20 minutes, it felt like an eternity to get to the hospital, lights and sirens. And when I got out of his car, my ability to compartmentalize kind of took over. And I think that this is what people saw of me and were kind of in awe of. But some of that comes from, childhood trauma and being able to survive in the midst of heartache. And so I saw that the entire hospital was locked down. I saw media presence. They had to unlock the hospital so that I could walk in. And when I got there, there was those like flexi, barrier fences, and there were hundreds of people in the hospital behind these barriers. And I felt like I was in slow motion, walking in a daze. And in that moment, I remember begging in my mind a doctor or nurse or a family member, or like my brother-in-law. He's actually in law enforcement and was on duty that day and was called to Micah's shooting, not knowing it was his brother-in-law that he was called to. And Kalani passes me in the hall, and everything in me was like, tell me this isn't real. Tell me they got it wrong. And all he said was, I'm so sorry. And I walked into the room, and there was people, it was full of people that I didn't know, who had become really important people to me. But in that moment, I was very confused about why I was walking into a room full of strangers and what all this meant and what I was supposed to do with that. And my brother and sister-in-law bring my kids in, and I put them each on one of my knees. And I said, guys, I was like, I'm so sorry Daddy didn't make it. He's in heaven. And I was so grateful for that moment of seeing that television show that morning, of watching her tell the triplets that their dad was gone, because something in me really needed a model. I needed to have some idea how to give my kids this news. And it wasn't the same situation, but it gave me just enough of a picture to have the courage to do it. We as a family spent some time with Micah's body, and I started getting to know all of the command staff of the sheriff's office. We got in a processional where thousands of people were already flanking the streets, and Micah was already in a casket with a flag draped over it. Every person in the hospital on staff was saluting him, being rolled through the hospital to the hearse. And almost a surreal experience watching these people waving American flags and honoring Micah on his way to the coroner's office. And it was the hardest thing I think I've had to do, to leave him at the coroner's office. I was like, I can't. It was like, he's still here. He's not gone. And to get back in the car and drive back home was just, it's an experience without words. And to hold my babies on either side of me in the car, people still lining the streets, and then get in to the house, and our house is full of dozens and hundreds of people in the yard, and people, having a candlelight vigil, and like everything was already happening, and he'd been dead for 2.5 hours.
That's a lot.
It was really overwhelming. And then we're watching the news, and he's made, local news and then national news. And that was surreal, just took a shower, pulled the comforter off my bed, got the kids showered, and we just sat under my big down comforter and watched the news and felt my life falling to pieces around us that night.
Yeah, when people get the news that a loved one has died, they, there's certain things, and I want to say it's relatively low key, because then you find out, then you're at home, and then you go and you plan for the funeral, and then the funeral comes and goes, and like that. But with a police death, it doesn't work like that.
Not at all.
I mean, you're on stage. There's no private time for you. And so it sounds to me like from the moment that you got to the hospital, it was it was in the news. It was, everybody was coming to you, and it doesn't sound like you had an opportunity to really process.
No.
Because it just sounds like it was so busy.
I think
And everybody means well, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah, absolutely.
the police, the sheriff's department, all the command staff, everybody means well, because in their mind, they're there for you. They're supporting you through this event, right? But I could see, so I've also attended numerous law enforcement, memorial services and stuff like that, but I had never put myself in the shoe of the family or the wife. Although I will say that my heart, just sinks, because even though I was a police officer, my ex-husband is also a police officer. And I always imagine what it would have to be like to tell our children, obviously I put myself in your dad is not here, so I can't even imagine, even now that my kids are older, they're teenagers, because he's still on the job. I still worry. I still have that worry. And that's me having been in law enforcement. So I can't even imagine someone who isn't in law enforcement. I mean, you were very aware because Micah made you very much, aware of his world at work,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still different, right? So I can't even imagine what that is like, and then to be so overwhelmed by people who are meaning well,
Mm-hmm.
but technically are not giving you the space to process and grieve with your children. That's a
Yeah.
lot.
I'm definitely, I like to grieve in private. I want to have my snot string cries on the carpet by myself.
Yeah,
Some people really get a lot out of grieving communally.
right.
And that has just never been my style. And so, yes, in that moment that day, I think the only time I allowed myself to cry was in the shower after I got home. Um, and then just feeling my heart, splintering into thousands
Yeah,
of pieces, and not having any clue how to even be present with that, right? But also being like, um, just surrounded by strangers, even in our home, and it was like I don't know what to do with this.
yeah,
I'm not saying that it's don't show up. I'm not saying don't show up. I'm just kind of sharing that perspective of what the heck is going on? Who are you? Am I supposed to do
yeah.
something with you? Like usually when you meet a stranger in your house, like you're supposed to interact with them, right? Like that's
They're in your house, yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And so to be like, well, am I supposed to interact with them? Like I don't even know what to do right now. So yeah, it was surreal. And then the next day we started planning the funeral. And so it was more
Mm,
command staff and my liaison and everybody who had a vested interest in the process. My mother-in-law is the oldest of 13. And so she had like 75 of her brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews at the
oh
house.
my
And
gosh.
everyone who's ever loved, like our family's pretty well connected in this community. And so it was just a revolving door of people coming in and hugging us and bringing flowers and weeping and just, I think, that pain is relatable to anyone who's lost
Hmm.
someone, but just imagine that times like 100. And
Yeah.
that's line of duty.
And Ken, to your point, to see it over and over and over in the news and
Mm-hmm.
everything, I mean, that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like it would be overwhelming for anybody, and the time. I mean, because when you heard it, I'm sure you're in shock,
Mm-hmm.
and you're on your way to the hospital, and it's just like anybody who's been in any kind of shock like that. You're kind of like an out of body experience almost. You don't. How did I get here? What's going? And so to have all these people, and then the procession to the coroner's office and everything, and the flags and the honor and everything, it just seems like you didn't have time to really process it,
Hmm.
because I don't think people realize that all the different, someone's tugging you at this, someone's tugging you at this side.
Mm-hmm.
We want to talk to you, we want to talk to you, and then of course your kids.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
um
To be strong for your kids, right? Because you have to
Yeah.
be, you're grieving with your loss. At the same time, you have to be strong for your children. How old were your children at this time?
They were
When this?
7. Yeah, they
Yeah,
were
they're so
7 when he died.
little.
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
really little. Yeah, that was one wonderful thing about having so many people in our house was that they were playing with the kids, and people were gifting my kids to the point of like, a Christmas amount of presents or something, like anything they could do to make the kids feel better. And children have this incredible ability to toggle in and out of their grief. They can
Mhm.
be devastated in a moment and, they sat on my lap and we read a book about loss and they're deeply grieved, and then they could get up and run around with their friends for a little while and it was like they weren't in touch with it. And that's such a beautiful part of the child mind is that they don't experience it 100% of the time like adults do, right?
Yeah.
And so it snowed quite a bit the week that Micah died, and I'll never forget one of his aunts was doing cartwheels with the kids in the snow in the front yard. I was like, people, I mean, nobody told them no for probably 18 months. Anything that they wanted, people would do.
Mm.
A friend of mine was one of my former sergeants, and he went on to head the employee assistance unit at LAPD. And that unit would be the unit that handled all police line of duty deaths, funerals, and things like that. And I remember talking to him. In fact, he that's his business today in retirement. He goes around the nation helping police departments plan funerals, because a police funeral is not your regular funeral. I was a department chaplain for 5 years, and we would typically get called because a police family for retired officers would pass away, and then they wanted a religious, quote unquote, a religious figure there. So they would call the department chaplain. And I could go there and I would spend an hour with the family and I would put everything together. I would talk to the kids and what were your memories of dad and things like that. And so it would take me maybe an hour. And then the day of, it was a very scripted type of thing. It didn't take very long. Not so with police funerals. Police funerals are huge. They're big. They just, and the thing about it is they go on for days.
Yeah.
The memorial part of it goes on for days. And so for people listening to this, on Rachel's website, there's several videos that play consecutively. One of them is the actual memorial service or the funeral service that you guys had for Micah. And from my experience in police funerals, many times I've been to police funerals where the church was filled. There was the 5 officers that died in Dallas. That was held at a stadium. There are thousands of people that show up, and you had such grace on that day. And I encourage anybody to go and watch Rachel's when you had to speak. You did an incredible job. Tell us about the police funeral and what goes into that.
You did a good lead up there. So every time they moved Micah's body, it was a motorcade. And so, when he goes from the coroner to the funeral home to the embalming location, back to the funeral home, I mean, just, and that was like, so 2.5 hours of every day was in some kind of motorcade, in the midst of trying to plan, find his mementos for the memento table and make a video for him and get clothing for the funeral. And people are flying, our family's flying in from all over the nation, right? Like it just becomes this really huge experience. And we had a private family funeral of about 800 people the day before, and that was a viewing, and we invited the agency and friends and family to come and be there. And then we had the public funeral, which had at least 10,000 people in attendance for Micah, and the 8,000 in the church, I guess, sanctuary was full, and then every overflow space that they had was full. And that included the church, hundreds of volunteers, like doing things like having coffee and snacks. And, because you've got your honor guard and you've got these people who are all playing a role in the funeral, like the, kind of honor professional role. So, we get there and they put us in a green room, and then you're escorted by the honor guard behind Micah. We had a bagpipe troupe. And so, I mean, it gives me chills. Even now, it's hauntingly beautiful to be in that place. And talk about surreal. I mean, it was just like thousands and thousands of people watching you follow your husband's casket. I was like, sometimes I just go back to that and I'm like, did that really happen? And then Micah's funeral was 3.5 hours, I think. His was a little extra long. I mean, I spoke for 20 minutes. I didn't cut his memorial video short. We did the 21 gun salute and all the things. And then, the rose ceremony. And there was agencies, over 100 agencies from around the nation, Mexico and Canada, were represented at Micah's funeral. Micah was the third death in 5 weeks in Colorado, and all intentionally murdered. And so I think, a fervor was building around this, and people were really captivated by that. And I think just even the pictures of me and my family, like the love that Micah and I had for each other, is pretty evident in the photos that I shared. And I think that draws people's hearts to the loss even more so than they always do. I wanted two things that week. I wanted to greet people at Micah's private funeral. I wanted to have a receiving line, and I wanted to speak at his funeral. And that seemed completely like out of touch with what I was capable of. And I had a really sweet experience with the presence of God that I feel like supernaturally empowered me to do what I did that week and to be in the spaces that we were in. And I was able to greet the people for 3 hours. I greeted people at his funeral. And then the next day, to give his eulogy. And the thing that I felt about Micah's death, so, in all of the stories that he told me, Micah and I also, we were super nerds together, and we regularly talked about the culture of law enforcement and the validity of various critical incidents that had happened around the nation that were in current events in the news. And Micah really taught me the world of law enforcement. And he taught me, the law. Like, he would be like, well, as long as they have, probable cause and reasonable suspicion and, these. And so, like, those were our dinner conversations. And in the midst of all that, I saw so much truth that was not portrayed in the media, that didn't run well with the narrative, that got hidden. And so it made law enforcement look bad because the whole story wasn't being told. But agencies have a very strong culture around thou shalt not speak. If this is for the PIO, there's a public statement. Like, we don't open ranks to the details of the case in any way. And so I perpetually felt this sense of injustice, that no one was actually talking about what had really happened and why decisions were made that made certain events legal, or what was appropriate about certain arrests that led to lethal shootings, things like that. So when Micah died, all of that passion of these years around the dinner table had built to a fervor in me. And I was like, I am Mother flipping Teresa. I can say whatever I want. My husband died. I can talk about law enforcement. I can talk about our culture. I can talk about the sacrifice that men and women give for our safety every single day. And that was burning in me. I wanted to humanize the badge. I wanted people to know who Micah was as a husband and a father. I wanted people to know what an incredible officer he was and what he offered to our community, and how he absolutely defies the narrative of ACAB and all the ridiculousness that is. And then I really caught a whole fire in my belly, and I went on a rant, and I talked about our culture, and I talked about why we have the death of officers like we do, and what is going on with the massive acceptance of the disrespect of authority. And I said, if you steal a car and you get caught, you turn yourself over. Can I get an amen? Right? Like, this man who killed Micah was 100% in the wrong, and they followed him for 8 hours, and they had all the evidence that they needed and more. And this guy had told his friend, it came out in the investigation later, I'll kill a cop when I get the chance. And he knew he'd been made, and there were some things that were missed about him, the suspect, knowing that he was being tailed. But that was an intentional revenge killing in a way, right? Whatever revenge looked like in that suspect's mind, to take my husband's innocent life. Micah never pulled his weapon. The suspect shot my husband's partner in the hip and went to execute him. And Micah grabbed that gun and wrestled him for all he was worth. And it saved Scott's life, but it cost Micah his. And in light of that sacrifice and his teammates saying, Rachel, if Micah hadn't given his life, we would be having multiple funerals. And I couldn't help but honor and acknowledge the heroism of that. And I had to tell people what that looked like. And it needed to come from my heart and my voice, because I'm so honored that the governor was there and that he honored Micah's loss. And I'm so honored for our city leaders and the way that they honored Micah, and the sheriff, and the, spiritual message that was spoken. I love all of those things, but it needed to hit home for people and the issue. And I felt like this was the moment to do that.
And this was your eulogy time, right?
This was my eulogy.
If anybody's who's listening to this, take the opportunity to listen, to watch that eulogy. It's on YouTube. It's powerful. It is powerful. I mean, you were coming out. I just have to say that the strength that you exhibited, and it can only come from God, that you had that strength, and you told it like it is. You had that stage.
I
You
pulled
were the
zero
police
punches.
Yeah, you were the police widow. You're not going to stop me. And that was an amazing eulogy that you gave.
What is the website if people want to go see it?
My website is rachelflick.com, RACHAELFLICK, and it's on there. And then you could also just Google like Micah Flick eulogy and it'll come up, or Rachael Flick eulogy, and that specific cutout of his 3.5-hour service will come up.
Yeah, and that's we'll have that in the show notes, the websites and things like that. As far as the funeral goes, I've been in several processions. They go for 4 or 5 miles, these processions. And the one early on, one time I was just struck by the amount of people that come out and they line the streets and they have American flags, and there's people that little children, and there's people just with their hands over their hearts and just showing honor and respect. The funeral takes a long time to plan, and then to execute and all that kind of stuff. And there's so much pomp and circumstance, and there's so much honor. I mean, there's so much. The Amazing Grace on the bagpipes, the amount of people, the dignitaries that show up, the thousands of people that are there is just not because just so they wanted to go and show up to a funeral. They wanted to go and show honor to police officers. And that is the beautiful thing about police funerals. You never want them to happen, but they're spectacular.
Yeah. You see all the police cars. You see the fire rigs with the flag, the ladders with the flag hanging.
Yeah.
And all the personnel in their Class A uniforms, everything. It's
riderless horsemen.
Yeah.
The honor guard. I mean, that was something that really struck me, was that Micah was never alone the entire week before he was buried. Like, people volunteered to take shifts to stand beside him, whether that was during his autopsy or in the funeral home. He was never alone. And that it's such an unusual thing in our culture, but it was so beautiful. And it honestly comforted me because I couldn't be with him.
Yeah, that's, and I want to get into the, how police, I want to tie a couple things in, the aftermath of the funerals. When I was doing, when I was a chaplain doing funerals, I learned that leading up to the funeral, there'd be this planning and things, and then people would be at the house and things. And then once that day of the funeral happens, everybody leaves. Not so with police families, because every year on February 5th, there comes a time. Minerva, when I was planning this with Rachel, she specifically told me, okay, I can't do it. This is the anniversary week. And there's something that goes on that entire week. I don't know, maybe that month, I'm not sure. But and then there's remembrances. You can Google Micah's name, and there's articles this is the today is the anniversary. Today's the anniversary, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a yearly honoring of his memory. And so for the police family, that that never that never dies. That goes on. What's the aftermath for a police widow?
Mm. Well, I think my willingness to say what I said, and I've been to several law enforcement funerals since, and I know that what I did was unusual. Like I mean, if the widow says anything, she reads a letter and someone comes up and kind of holds her, like holds her standing, so that she can read the letter. And that is a profound act of courage and bravery. And I affirm everyone who's done that. But I have a lot of experience in public speaking. That ministry that I was talking about that was supposed to launch Tuesday of that week was a place where I did teaching and preaching and ministry to about 200 mothers of preschoolers at that time. And so people didn't really know that that was in me per se. And so this wasn't my first rodeo with speaking. I was really intimidated about how to speak in front of 8,000 people. But once I got up there, it was like everything just flowed. So because I spoke, I think people were kind of shocked. Like there's, the the funeral is this beautiful, haunting thing of tribute. We have so little ceremony in American culture. Even a wedding, you want to do that barefoot in the ocean or while you're snorkeling. Who cares? We
Mhm.
just don't have a lot of things that we do a certain way. And there's very specific protocol around things that happen with line of duty funerals.
Yeah.
And so, this happens. And I remember Micah's funeral procession lasted over 20 miles because I chose to bury him in Black Forest. And there were people all the way there. And I remember, though, after all of the driving and all of the motorcades, and I was even kind of sick of limousines at that point, which sounds really weird to say that, but I was just like, everything was so different from normal life. I was just exhausted by it. And I was like, it's time. It's time to lay him to rest. And I had this deep sense of peace in leaving him at the cemetery, which was a beautiful gift to me. But fundraisers and plaque presentations, and Micah received the Valor Award posthumously from several agencies, and I attended banquets, and I spoke at many places because people knew that I could, and I spoke for Police Week and the new christening of the police memorial in Colorado Springs, and traveling to different things, and just going to check presentations. And like my liaison had her hands full, like for months, trying to manage my schedule for Micah stuff, right? Like just for things that needed to happen for the sheriff's office. And I got so many thin blue lined. First of all, I could wallpaper my house in thin blue line flags. I received so many as gifts. I have them in droves. We received so many gifts of honor and cards that I actually had to hire an organizer to help me sift through them, because there was no more room. Like I couldn't walk through my space in the house. They were just piled kind of hoarder style with a little, walkway in between. And everything we wrote down, everything we sent thank you notes for, handling all of the public safety officer benefit things, right? There's this huge administrative thing, going to Social Security meetings, getting all of these legal briefings on things that I didn't even begin to understand and I couldn't remember. So I had people coming with me and taking notes for me, the initial debrief from the DA of what had actually happened that day. That was 4 months after Micah was killed. I met regularly with people. So there was 10 people there that day at the shooting, and I met with them individually because I wanted to hear from them what happened. That was important in my processing and my sense of closure. I mean, someone donated. So I was living with my in-laws at the time when Micah was killed, and someone donated an entire new yard to them for Earth Day. And so they like completely renovated their front yard, ripped it out to the base and put the whole thing in. It was like watching a television show to see the whole thing come and go in 48 hours. And that made the news, and they wanted a press conference. And so I shared kind of the process of that. So I know that I was willing to engage at a higher level because I felt the responsibility to share Micah's story in light of him giving his life. Like, police and their families have to be silent in order to be in alignment with their agency's restrictions about the information that they share. And that is tremendously controlled. And I was like, well, I lost Micah. And so there's nothing you can do. Like, I'm going to say what I'm going to say.
Right.
And so when I got invitations to speak, I took them because I was so passionate about the message.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
That sounds like something you would do, Minerva. You would go like, yeah, you're on your own. I'm saying what I'm going to say.
Mhm.
Yeah, that sounds like me too. Because it's true. Like, nobody knows what you're going through but you.
Hmm.
Or other widowers, that have gone through exactly the same thing, right? And so for them to try and censor you, it's like, I don't think so.
Nobody did, for the record. Nobody tried. But,
I just don't see that
but
happen.
because you set that
Because of
boundary
who it
to be
was,
from the
yes.
get-go,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you did. They knew, like, okay, she's gonna speak up.
Mm-hmm.
And good. I'm glad nobody tried to censor you. Because that's
Hell
not
hath
cool.
no fury. I'm glad
Yes.
they didn't try.
Exactly.
And every year during this anniversary, you called it something specific. Did you call it anniversary?
I call it the grief anniversary.
The grief anniversary.
Uh-huh.
Do you already know ahead of time every year? Do you have to go do something, or do you have to go speak, or how does that?
So it's for the first 3 years, the agency does a wreath ceremony, and so there was a very formal ceremony, presentation, honor guard, all the command staff, and they came to the cemetery, and we all, did that, and then, in one way or another, every year, I've taken the opportunity to get together with his team, with the people who worked with him, with the people who were on battle. And sometimes we've, like bought the bar and gotten drinks together for the afternoon and just kind of turned it into a time of connection. Micah loved poker. And it's funny because I didn't know how to play poker before he died, but the guys that he would play poker with were at work. And so they taught me. And so now we get together and we play poker on Micah's anniversary as a way to honor him. And it's honestly so healing for all of our hearts, right? Like, because they don't have the space to grieve Micah. Like at work, they got to get stuff done, right? Like,
Right.
and so to come specifically for this purpose and just the love that we all have for each other. And, we're going to be a part of each other's lives forever. Like, those kind of critical incidents just bond you, whether that's a trauma bond or what, but it's been great. And they're people that I love, and I know their wives and their kids and their stories. And, so we've done it a little differently, and I've kind of played with it, like depending on what I have capacity for. There is annually the police week. We have the memorial, we have a 5K, and then we have a ball. And so that's very, honor guard, 21 gun salute, release the doves, those kind of similar things to the line of duty culture. And then it seems like the news community has come to honor my voice as an expert in the area of this kind of loss. And so I will often be called on to comment, and people will say, well, how can we support people in critical incidents? What can we do for the family? What's the way that we can best as a community support them? And so, we had the big shooting in Boulder 2 years ago, and Eric Talley, and I wrote an open letter to his wife, and that really resonated with people. And I did what I could to support Andrew Peary's family, who died last August, and raise funds for them. And just so those have been times where it's like, kind of similar and an uptick. Like anytime that there's an event, there's things that kind of pop up around that, and I try to take those opportunities if I can.
And for the most part, everybody focuses on the spouse, and but there's kids too, and your two kids are in a club that they would never have wanted to be in.
Yeah.
They're
I think the kids, we don't hear about them as much because we feel really protective, and the news coverage is kind of intimidating in and of itself. And so we don't even know how to handle that for ourselves as adults. And we want to protect our kids' privacy as much as possible. I know for most kids, there's usually honor and recognition at their schools on some level. And they definitely become insta famous. My kids get a kick out of their ability to Google their own Wikipedia pages now. 5 years out, we have a little bit of humor around that. But yes, they do become a part of a club, and it's a club that they hate. I think, though, what I've learned as a mom in line of duty is to continue to pursue that. We have a really good relationship with Rachael Swayze and her kids. Garrett was killed in the Planned Parenthood shooting in 2016, 2015. And so her kids are in the club too, and they actually go to school with my kids. And so it has brought some normalization of like other kids know what this feels like. Other kids have experienced this, and we are not these like, Quasimodo weird monsters of society who have this really strange thing that's happened to them, and people are treating us weird. My kids will continue to say that they don't really know what to do when people who recognize them come up and like, "Hey, how are you? You've gotten so big." And they were like, "I have no idea who you are." Very well intended. And I would encourage people not to, back away from that. But I mean, it's awkward when people greet me and they recognize me and I don't know who they are. So it's, it doesn't
Yeah.
go away.
Yeah.
But they have received some special gifts, some scholarships to, equestrian therapy or different opportunities to honor their dad through serving them.
there's videos out there where like on the 5-year-old, he goes for his first day of kindergarten, and all the police officers line up. Or there's the one where the partner made a promise that to the daughter that we're gonna take you to prom, and they all do those type of things, and it's it's like to me it's the coolest thing. I don't know how you view it, but it's the coolest thing that people still remember. They were never, they always say, "We'll never forget you. We'll never forget." And they do these things. So it seems kind of cool to an outsider to see that. And do you find that, is there ever a time where you just go, I'd like to take a break. I'd like to take a break, but something always continued, because you're in a unique position that you actually minister, you reach out, or they reach out to you when other police families are going through this.
I think other people felt more protective of me than I did of myself, to be honest. They're like, people are prying and people keep asking you. And I'm like, I'm a big girl. I can say no. I'm familiar with the word, I'm pretty solid with my boundaries. And so there were things that I did say no to, and I have said no to. I do find a tremendous amount of purpose. One of the ways that is practical in resilience is serving others. That can obviously become something that's too heavily leaned on, where you don't grave your own stuff.
Yeah.
But for me, it has brought a lot of purpose out of Micah's loss. And I kind of hate it when people say that law enforcement deaths are senseless, because there's tremendous reason behind why they're dying, right? It's not like someone who steps off the sidewalk at the wrong time and gets hit by a bus. That's a senseless death. That's like a meaningless accident, like, it happened at the wrong time, wrong place, that kind of thing. That's not what's happening in America with losing our officers. And so by reaching out and continuing to humanize the badge. And I think the thing about grief also is it's the gift that keeps on giving. Like, you cannot control grief. You cannot say, I'm done with it. Now it goes in a box. You know, there's times when you can function and times when you cannot. And those times when you cannot have to be honored. And in those times, I mean, that's kind of what I was expressing to you, Ken, is like, there were some formal things happening around Micah's anniversary. But what I was protecting, I think, in that conversation was my body's capacity because of grief. And I have the somatic, visceral memory of his loss. And I actually grieve the Sunday after Super Bowl, or the Monday after Super Bowl. And then I remember, like, from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, through everything we did those days. And I sometimes, well, no, I feel like I'm reliving them. And so I know that I have to protect that time, and I can't, commit myself to anyone, because I need to honor that grief. And so those are ways where I've learned to say no. And then there's times when I've gotten really triggered in an event where they're, memorializing Micah, and I get up and I leave. I just walk out, like, I've given myself permission to say, this is more than I can do right now. And I did have to grow into that skill, that I could leave a formal event that I had not walk off stage. Thankfully, I haven't had to do that when I was speaking, but like, being in the audience and being an honored guest there and being like, I got to go take a walk, and that's okay.
That's pretty incredible. Your story of being resilient. And I like that word, because it's brings strength to the conversation. You have a podcast now, and tell us about what Rachael does 5 years later. It's been 5 years. Tell us about Rachael. What are you about now? Because now it's not, I've been married a long time, and it's always Ken and Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
We're a package deal. And now with you, you're kind of you kind of go on your own to these everything now. What is your life about now? And tell us about your podcast.
Well, I think there's two questions in that. One, it is a radical shock to become to check the widowed box, or to become a single without a plus one, or, Rachael and Micah, right? Micah and Rachael, like you're saying, Ken and Jenny, to not be able to say that, or to have to find a friend who's willing to go to an event with me so that I don't feel silly being a solo, person at this event. And that is definitely a massive transformation of identity, because I think when you become married and have a family, you craft a lot of identity around those relationships. And so I was like, well, if I'm not a wife, and I'm a single mom, like, what does that even mean? Like, everything about our life has changed in the way that we relate day to day. And, even sitting down at dinner was hard. It's like, well, where's dad in the chair? He should be here for dinner. I mean, super simple things that were very painful. Watching Levi go through, his first, little flag football league after Micah died was like, every day, every practice was excruciating, because I was like, he's gifted like his dad. He's here because his dad was passionate about this. Like, he always played football with his dad, stuff that reminds you about them, that's like maybe a little underneath of the surface. So in the midst of that, I became passionate that wouldn't be the defining mark of my life. Like, I didn't want to be the hanging air quotes widow, right? I didn't want to be the grief girl. I have a strong drive for independence, and that worked well for me in the situation, because I was like, I don't want to be controlled by pain. I don't want to be identified by my loss. I want to be identified by how I handled my loss and who I become after my loss, And so that was really motivating for me. And I did a lot of therapy. Like, if you could do a kind of therapy, I pretty much did it in the first 18 months. And after that, even though I felt like kind of a baby and like I was faking it until I made it, a little bit of imposter syndrome there, I was like, other people can relate to this. And other people are saying that seeing me continue to commit to my faith, to believe in the goodness of God, and to get up every day when I don't want to get up out of bed, to
Mhm.
continue to parent, to live my life in a way that is honoring, and I haven't, just thrown myself off the side of the cliff, which a lot of people do allow grief to become their story. They get stuck and they never get out. And so I wanted to create the Hope Cast because I wanted to teach people about post-traumatic growth and resilience. And what does that look like through community, through models, through mentorship, through healthy therapeutic options, through stories of people who are overcomers, who are victorious. And that even though I tell really hard stories, I think I tell them in a way that inspires people that you can experience the worst things life has to offer and your life isn't over.
Yeah, that I encourage everybody. Like I say, I'll have the link in the show notes to go to Rachel's podcast or the page. And Micah died prior to 2020, and you were passionate during Michael's eulogy about what I would consider the war on cops. So what is your advice? And we're going to be closing here in just a second, but what is your advice for those before 2020 happened and all that? It was getting difficult to get police applicants.
Yes.
Post 2020, wow, that just went. It's been an incredible time, a difficult time to get police officer applicants. It's just a terrible time right now. What would you say to those going, based on your experience and what you know about police work and the realities of it, and post 2020? What would you say to those who still want to stay the course and become police officers?
Well, I would say don't believe the worst of what you've heard. There's been so much negative media attention that it feels like it would be difficult to be successful even in the best agency with the best pay and the best shift, right? Like there's just been a sense of doom around law enforcement, right? And pain sells. Like I call it trauma porn. Like that is a clickbait monster in the media. And so a lot of the things that have potentially influenced your perspectives were not the whole story. And I think that, I'm on the Law Enforcement Transparency and Advisory Commission for Colorado Springs, and our goal is to help make CSPD the best possible agency they can be through advocating for different things in their budget and training and just reviewing the way that they enforce the law and how can that be the best that it can be. And they are a great agency. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. But they strive for excellence. And they want to do it well. And I think, you have to know your why. If you're thinking about going into law enforcement, you're going to have to find your why, and it's going to have to sear itself into the core of your soul, because this job is going to push you to your limits. And if you have the tools in place, if you have the community, if you have the support, if you have the mental resourcing that you need, you can do it and you can get through it. We dearly and desperately need you to continue to hold the thin blue line. Like the line between order and chaos is, it's got some potholes, it's been really under attack. And I would say to look for a place that has a good reputation for support of their officers. And I would say that find people that you can be honest with as you go through the process. Find people who become your support system. Don't be silent. Don't keep it all to yourself. Don't only tell stories when you're having drinks, with friends every 8 weeks or whatever. That has to be a consistent culture in your life in order to do this job well. And I will say too, even through organizations like ICAT and stuff like that, like training is improving. good things are coming. There are a lot of bad things that came out of 2020, but there are a lot of good things. There are a lot of people who are passionate about the mental health issue for law enforcement, and better de-escalation tactics, and better arrest control tactics, and how can we interact with the world that we live with and do that well. And I would just encourage that perspective as you consider whether this is the right career for you.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Minerva, do you have anything in closing?
Yeah, I just want to thank Rachel for sharing your story. You know, I honestly wasn't familiar with it, or I don't know. I think, unfortunately, officers getting killed in the line of duty has become, I mean, it happens almost every day, right? And we hear about it. Oh, I don't think we always hear at all of those losses here in California for other states. But thank you. I mean, as a wife or ex-wife now, mother, and as a former cop, thank you so much for sharing that and bringing that perspective, to us, because, like I mentioned before, I've attended quite a few police funerals and never thought about the perspective from the family side. Always from the law enforcement side, right?
Yeah, because that's what you were familiar with. So
exactly.
Yeah, I had never thought about it from the law enforcement side really before that. And it's really been an honor to come here and to share my story. And I know that it does take a toll to hear line of duty loss stories, right? So I don't blame you for not being familiar with it, because there are times when I just have to turn the news off. And so I am so grateful for your sacrifice for your community and your family. And what you said, that your your kid's dad still does serve in law enforcement. And so that is something that you carry regularly. And I'm really grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. This is I think it's important. It's an important topic or conversation to have for those people that want to be in law enforcement. And we really appreciate you coming on here. And I'm just amazed at you as a person and everything that you've gone through, and the fact that you're still advocating. You are still you champion the profession of law enforcement, because it is an honor. It's an honor to be a police officer and a police officer's family. And so we can't thank you enough for being here. And with that, we're going to go, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for listening to the Police Applicant Podcast. We are the premier police background prep site in the U.S. and Canada. For more information on scheduling your police background consultation, go to policebackground.net. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes.